Lindsey. I'm a crystal meth addict. I guess I'm nervous just saying that first part. I'm Lindsey, and I'm a crystal meth addict. And I feel like after that point, it's easier if I can figure out how to sit. Basics. So, I really appreciate you asking me to speak. Of course, Ray gets nervous when you're asked to speak outside of your area, and there was a time when there wasn't anybody who wanted to hear me speak, and so I'm really honored to be here. I can't sit. And it just so happens that every time I end up being asked to tell my story, it seems like my life is absolutely falling apart, and I'm experiencing some other pivotal, life-changing experience, which always makes the story more interesting. So here it goes. So my sobriety date is August 3rd, 2010, and I have a sponsor who's sitting right there. She has a sponsor who has a sponsor, and it just goes on and on and on. And Stephen's best friend, my very first sponsor, was truly my lifesaver when I got here. She was my lighthouse in the storm. And so I'm supposed to share what it was like before, what happened, and what it's like now. To start with what it was like before, it was pretty regular. I was born in 1984 in Atlanta, Northside Hospital, and my parents were pretty great parents. I had a really basic childhood, and when I say basic, like they moved me to the suburbs, and I just had a regular, non-eventful life for the most part. My mom is the kindest person I've ever known. Very passive, but very sweet, very enabling, but very, she does the best that she can. And my dad, also very kind and loving, and a very mean alcoholic as well. And so nothing really started occurring in my life until I was a teenager, of course. That's when, my dad's alcoholism really kind of started getting to a point where I noticed, like, my parents were always, like, party people. Like, they always had parties. There was always alcohol around. It wasn't really crazy, like, outside of happy hour crazy, but it was always around. My dad, started drinking more and more. When I was a teenager, we started getting into those typical fights of teenager and dad, and we just constantly butted heads. It would turn ugly a lot, and it was just very troubling to go through as a teenager. So obviously, when I started acting out in school, middle school, smoking cigarettes and pot, and I do remember when I had my very first beer. I remember because I was scared to drink it because I knew I wasn't supposed to be doing it. But then people were like, why aren't you drinking your beer? And so I really drank the whole damn beer, and I got drunk right away. And I was pretty excited, and I vomited the entire night, and then I did it again the next night. So that's what we do. That was my kind of partying. So that's what I started doing in my spare time. And my freshman years, when it really started taking off, I would save my lunch money, and by the end of the week, I would have $20, $5 a day, so I would be able to buy a roll of ecstasy. And that's what I would do on Friday night. I got myself a fake ID and started coming here to Atlanta to all of the raves with my 18-year-old friends. I don't even know where I met these people. So I was like 14, going to raves all night. I caught my first charges that year. I had stolen my mom's car because I wanted to go somewhere and didn't have anybody to come pick me up. So I took the car without asking. I didn't have a license. So I wrecked it and left the scene and dropped it back off at home like nothing had happened. And I was charged with criminal trespass, driving without a license, and hit and run. And I was put on juvenile probation. And I was still going to raves, and I had a 11 o'clock curfew that my mom did not enforce. The probation officer didn't enforce it. I sailed right through that probation. So in high school, getting suspended for fighting. I was bullied a lot. I always felt like I was almost popular, but never popular. Like I wanted so badly to be popular and to be accepted, and I ended up fitting right in with all the druggies because I didn't have it in me to be friends with the cheerleaders. So started sleeping around with people's boyfriends because that's how we get attention the way that we want to, is by sleeping around. So I got the wrong kind of attention, got in a lot of fights, and finally dropped out my sophomore year. And then I didn't have anything keeping me from doing what I really wanted to do, which was to do drugs all day, every day. And that's when I discovered crystal meth. And I believe I was 15. And, everybody was snorting it at that time. And so that's really what I did. I remember I felt like my fucking face was going to fall off the first time I did it. It burned so badly. But yeah, I stayed up for 3 days off of a line. So that was the best thing ever. So that's what I did for 3 years straight. I didn't get in any more trouble, but I did get knocked up when I was 18 on a meth bender with a using buddy, some guy I was with. So I did get pregnant, and I was too scared to have an abortion. So I decided to continue on with my pregnancy with a meth addict as a baby daddy, and I didn't even know, really. We had been together using for like 3 months, and so yeah, that was my grand idea, was to have a baby with somebody who I didn't know. So I stopped using a few months into my pregnancy when I found out I was pregnant. So I did use the first couple of months of my pregnancy. I used to have nightmares when I was pregnant that he was going to come out with all these birth defects, and luckily he did not. Shortly after I had my son, I had him in 2003. His name is Anthony. I really started using meth again, and I thought, I'm ready for a job. I'm a grown woman now. I was 19 when I had him, and I'm ready for a job. So the job that I went out and got was being a waitress at the Pink Pony, day shift. So that's what I did for a year and a half. I kind of put the meth down. Meth addicts weren't really common in the Atlanta strip club scene, but cocaine was. And so that is when I switched. I switched narcotics and started binge drinking in the morning when I got to work. People drank on the job. So I started drinking during the day, doing cocaine all day, and sobering up by 7 p.m. so I could blow in the breathalyzer and they could let me leave in my car. And I did that. Got my first hostage, my first volatile relationship, so to speak, with somebody who was 10 years older than me, who was also a cocaine dealer, and in Atlanta. So I did that for about a year and a half until the relationship turned so volatile. We're being physically abusive towards each other, and I ended up going to work one day and took too many pills that were in his medicine cabinet. I didn't even know what I was taking. I think I ended up taking like some sort of Seroquel or something that wasn't even a fun drug, and couldn't even move on the floor. And so they had to walk me out to a car to ask me to leave. And so I never went back to the Pink Pony. I was pretty embarrassed. And so then 2005 or 2006 or something, this started the beginning of one of my lowest points in my addiction. I did end up going back to meth, and by the time I had started doing meth again, I went on this 2-year hiatus or something. I was using cocaine, and when I came back, everybody was smoking it, and I learned how to smoke it, and I learned how to shoot it, and it's all a blur. It's a combination of robbing people. My teeth had started to get really bad after I started smoking it, starting to turn black and break off. And there was a lot of leaving my son with my mother. And I actually convinced myself that I was doing a good job by, not leaving for the night until he was asleep and coming back by the time the sun came up and he was awake. And so that's what my life was like for several years. And until I started getting arrested. I started getting arrested as an adult, felony charges of possession. Just getting in accidents or getting pulled over and then searching my car and getting caught like that. And then, following arrests were just violation of probation and things like that. My last arrest was in 2008. It was my fourth arrest. And I was at the height of my addiction. All of my using buddies had gotten locked up. They were going to prison. And I had went to my first NA meeting and my first CMA meeting at the men's extension and had a toe in. Not 1 foot in and 1 foot out. I had a toe in. I listened to the literature and I made a couple of friends, newcomer friends, who once a week we would be like, let's go get high. So that's really what my first taste of recovery was like, hanging out with newcomers who were also had one toe in and most of their body out in active addiction still. And so I finally ended up violating my probation for the third time. That was my last arrest in 2008. And I was picking up chips in this program and still using. So I picked up all the way up to a 6-month chip, and I was still using. And so when I got arrested, I spent 60 days in jail. That was the longest time I had ever been locked up. And I was pretty scared. I was pretty scared at that point. I had a detox in jail. At that point, I think I was doing a lot of GHB as well. So I just had all sorts of stuff in my system. Anyway, something happened while I was in there. I can't tell you what to this day, but when I got out, I went off my rocker a little bit. I got out and started hallucinating at 79 days clean. So it just kind of gradually got worse until I finally ended up committing myself. Turns out I was manic and didn't have a substance in my system, but I felt like I was on a permanent acid trip. It was probably the scariest thing that's ever happened in my life. I remember snatching the chart one day when the nurse wasn't looking, and I looked at it, and I was so scared by what it said. It said acute psychosis, and I was like, oh my God, that's terrible. That was awful. So they had me all loaded up on the antipsychotics, Depakote, Seroquel, Zyprexa, lithium, and it lasted for 7 months. It was I can't say it enough, it was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, not being able to turn it off and seeing things, hearing people's thoughts, and not being able to be in the same room with somebody because I can hear what you're thinking. Now, I don't know if I could really hear what you were thinking, but I still think that I might have been able to hear what you were thinking. It was that real. So I could feel people's energy. That was one of my biggest hallucinations, is I could feel the energy of the people that I was around. Anyway, so when that I finally kind of stabled out to a point where I could get off most of the drugs, the Depakote and the Seroquel and the lithium, I slowly tapered off, and I started feeling okay. I still couldn't sleep with the lights off. I was pretty scared of the dark. That will happen when you're seeing demons out the window. And so once I started feeling back to normal, and I remember thinking during this entire time, I had done this to myself. I knew that I had done this to myself. I had done something to my fucking brain. I fucked it up enough. And the trauma of being in jail, or the sudden detox, I don't know, but something, flipped the switch. And I kept thinking, this is what I get for, this is all that I deserve. And so I thought, I'm never going to do meth ever again. I am never going to touch this drug. I'm never going to do this to my brain again. I was so fucking scared to touch that shit again. I was afraid I would go right back to that psychosis. But what do you know, after a month of being off those meds, I thought, I feel okay again. So I really went right back to that chalet. And, that lasted for about 2 years. I went back to the alcohol as well, stayed away from the GHB, but really went back and forth. I would drink. I would ride around with my child in the car with a water bottle full of vodka, and that's how I would spend my days with him in the back seat. I don't know how I never got caught doing that, and I don't know how I never lost him. But what would happen was I would drink, and that would be my drug of choice until I would get in another relationship, and then we would start doing meth again for a few months, and then that person would get locked up, and it just kind of stayed like that. And 2009, I met my last using relationship person, and it turned into the most horrific relationship, and it was the one that brought me down to the fucking floor that made me want to really stop this. I had been using for that point for 10 years, and I thought, it's just about enough. I had hit not a circumstantial bottom, I like to call it, where you literally lose everything. So I didn't have a job to lose. I didn't have a car. The only thing I had at that point was my child, and I hadn't lost him. I was losing my teeth. Piece by piece, and of course all the weight. I was like 100 pounds soaking wet, and but I was at such a low emotional bottom. All I could do was cry all the fucking time. All I wanted to do, I was so fucking sad and so worn down. I was so fucking tired of having nothing and being nothing, and being a fucking single mom with no fucking job history, no fucking way to take my fucking kid anywhere. I was tired. And, but the person I was with wasn't done. But he was also on parole, and he finally failed a drug test, and they sent him to the men's extension. So I thought, we can get sober now, because that's what happens. You don't want to go by yourself. You want to stay attached to the hip of that person. And believe it or not, that really is what brought me in, and I'm still here. That was in 2010 on August 3rd. And they recommend that you don't be in a relationship the first year. I did not break up with this person. We stayed together against all recommendations, and somehow managed to stay together for a long time in recovery. We'll skip to my first year. My first year in this program. I got to recovery, didn't have a car, no job history. That was the biggest thing for me. I had no job history. I felt so less than when I would go try to apply for a job, and I got to the job history section. I had nothing to put down except the pink pony. And that's it. Customer service skills, hustling skills, that's it. Negotiating skills, that's all I had. And so I was excellent in math, counting money, and but that was it. And so I literally always bailed. I got so fucking hopeless looking for a job. So I really kind of stopped that during the first year. My first sponsor, my fucking amazing sponsor, she paid for me to get my GED because I had no education as well. And it was like $100, and I didn't have the money for it. I didn't have anything. And so once I got that GED, she currently teaches college. She's a college professor, and she's a crystal meth addict. So she basically held my hand and showed me exactly what the fuck to do to get into college on the government's dime, and I did. I applied for a Pell Grant, and I went to school. And I started school at like 3 months clean, and that's what I did for the next 2.5 years or 3 years in recovery. I stayed going to school. I did get a job working with somebody in recovery, cleaning office buildings and apartment buildings, and vacuuming and mopping floors. And I was very proud of that job because I didn't have any kind of job where I cared to show up and not let my coworker down and, the person that hired me. And so it was very humbling to be a janitor, but in the same token, it was very empowering. I was a regular citizen abiding by the law and getting a real paycheck. And it was a very small paycheck, but it was a paycheck. And it put gas in my car so that I could get to school. And, that it taught me work ethic. I didn't really work with anybody. I just worked with one person. You work with a vacuum. And it taught me work ethic and what it feels like to show up. Even if it's not something you really want to be doing, I wanted to show up. And so I did. And things got pretty, I worked with steps, I started getting sponsees. And at 3 years in recovery, I got to a plateau. I got to a really mundane point in my life where I felt very bored. Not bored with recovery, just flat is the best way that I can put it. There was no more climbing and no more aha. There should have been some aha, but it just kind of mellowed out, and there wasn't much that I was getting anymore. And so what, of course, happens in that situation is that God really shows up and shows you that there's no time for boredom. There's more stuff to be done in your life. And so in November of 2013, my mom was diagnosed with stage 3B lung cancer, small cell. And so my relationship with her in recovery only just blossomed, because she was always my favorite person in the whole wide world. She is my hero, and I felt so cheated when she got cancer because that's not fair. The good people aren't supposed to get sick. And I had really tried to work on a higher power my first couple of years in recovery, and I was very open. I had all these different, I took what I liked and left the rest out of everybody's religion, so I had all this stuff that I really liked, but I still felt very spiritually insecure, like it wasn't real. I wanted it to be real, but I didn't feel it. And let me just tell you, when my mom got sick for the very first time in my recovery, I felt it, but not before. I felt anger and despair and hatred. I felt I couldn't sit in a meeting without feeling pain and anger at the fucking person was sharing. I didn't even know the person, and I was fucking angry that they thought that their shitty fucking day at work meant fucking anything when my fucking mom was dying. I was in this self-righteous fucking self-pity and very much so a tragedy judger. Like, my tragedy could not be touched by your shitty fucking day. And that's exactly how I felt. I felt I was in so much fucking pain. I would cry on my lunch breaks at work, and I would cry on the way to work and on the way home. But I would show up to work. I just have to say that I did get another job. I left that part out right before my mom got sick. I finally got a really good job. I got a job at a call center. My supervisor's sitting right there because she's also in recovery. And, I work for this company now, and that happened in 2013. I had just gotten this job when my mom got sick, and I fucking showed up to work. I showed up to work. I put on my fucking clothes. I dried my fucking face, and I walked in the door, and I didn't cry while I was at work. There were some moments, but, I tried my best to keep putting one foot in front of the other and watching her go through chemo and radiation and being so fucking angry at whatever higher power I thought I had. What kind of higher power is that? And I had to change it. I absolutely had to change my higher power because I knew that my real fucking feeling of the great spirit of the universe does not make things happen. Bad things just fucking happen. That's not God's will. And it took a lot of work with my sponsor to understand that that's not God's will. Cancer is not God's will. Neither is active addiction, and neither is horrible tragedies. God doesn't make those things happen. They just fucking happen. And that really was the only way that I could accept what was happening, is that it just is. Truth is neither bad nor good, right nor wrong. It just is. And it was just happening. And, I finally started feeling that fucking feeling that was so elusive in recovery, the feeling of meaning and purpose. In the throes of despair, I felt my higher power. I felt the universe, and I felt all this fucking pain, and I felt so alive. I felt alive for the first time in recovery, truly alive. And that lasted for about 7 months. I stayed in this kind of weird fucking black hole where one day I would just be a mess, and the next day I would be high, like I was manic again, like life is so amazing. It was really crazy, teetering back and forth between those extreme emotions, extreme highs and extreme lows. And so my mom was on her last radiation treatment, and I had started to get a little bit of hope. I would teeter back and forth between fear and hope, and fear, and it would swallow me whole. I felt like I was floating. I always picture myself floating in some sort of body of water, just floating and bobbing along. And then I can feel that fear come up, and it's rising higher and higher on my neck. And if I entertain the thought of what my biggest fear is, then I get swallowed whole and I'm fucking drowning again. And it takes me a long time to get back out of that and remember that it's not real. It's just fear, and it hasn't happened yet, and it might not happen. And so that's one way that my disease has always manifested itself in my recovery, is through fear. It's like a drug to me. I cannot help myself sometimes but to entertain the worst possible case scenario, because I convince myself that if I can predict exactly what it might feel like and exactly how badly it will be, that it might not hurt as bad if it actually happens. That's a horrible theory. I mean, how miserable is that? But that's exactly what my brain, the logical part of my brain is telling me, is that I need to prepare myself. And that's one of my coping mechanisms, and it doesn't work very well for me. So when my mother was on her last radiation treatment, one day, it was October of 2014, I walked in, opened the door, and my dad was dying right in front of me. He was having a massive heart attack. And what the fuck is this shit? For a long time, my dad was, like I said, he was a raging alcoholic. He was very mean and hateful and hurtful, and then the next day he would be the kindest fucking person ever. And he always said, since I was a teenager, since I was that 14-year-old girl, he always said he would die of a heart attack. But he thought he would die a lot sooner, so he said that for like 20 years, so I never thought he would, and he really did. One day he just fucking dropped dead, and it's probably been the most single-handedly traumatic experience I've ever witnessed. Not just somebody dying right in front of me very suddenly, but my dad. And it was like a fucking horror movie. So he died, and on the way to his funeral, I wrecked my car on the way to his funeral. And, I say this just because it was another time in my sobriety where I will never forget the feeling ever. Because the first thing I wanted to do as soon as I felt that impact and realized what had just happened was I wanted to call my dad, and he was dead. And I just cried and cried and cried and cried, and that was the very first time in recovery that I truly wanted to drink. I truly wanted to escape so badly that I just wanted to run away. My mom getting sick, I knew that if I drank or used, it would just make it 10 times worse. But that moment at my dad's funeral was the moment that I really didn't care. I did not end up drinking, but I absolutely wanted to. And after that, it was definitely the winter season of my recovery. I can remember it feeling like it was just gray. And I was very surprised at how much pain I was in, because I really hated my dad for a long time, and I also loved him very much. And so it was a very troubled and confusing relationship to hate somebody that you love. And so my biggest fear, because I always knew he was going to die, because he always said it was right around the corner. So my biggest fear was that I wouldn't feel anything when he died. I was so scared that I wouldn't. That's how much I hated him while he was alive. I was so scared that I wouldn't feel a fucking thing. But then he died, and I really did. I was shocked at how much pain I was in, and I was surprised that it lasted so long. I was surprised that all I could do is go over the 5 minutes of his death from beginning to end every single day and cry and cry and cry. I know this story sounds so fucking sad, but this was in recovery. This was life on life terms, not, the stuff that I thought used to be life on life terms, not getting your way. This was tragedy in my life that I had to stay sober through, that I chose to stay sober through. I didn't have to do anything. And, right after my dad died, the partner that I had been with through my recovery, the one that I had last used with, we had been together for about 5 years. I'm sorry, we had been together longer than we had sober. We were about to pick up 5 years sober. And then he relapsed. And that was that. He got, back on the horse. And shortly after that, that was a very important event in my recovery because that was the person that I was with, hand in hand in recovery. We had the same sobriety date. And, a few months later, after his relapse, the only reason I'm sharing this part is because it's the only thing that takes me to the next part. Sharing needles, we get scared, so we get tested. And so he did share needles during that first relapse, and so really encouraged him to get tested. And when he got tested, after he came back, he ended up testing positive for Hep C, and then it just dawned on me that I don't think that he got it during his relapse. I went and got tested, and I too had Hep C. And we had it this entire time in recovery and didn't know. I started having night sweats and mouth ulcers for about a year before that point, so everything started making sense. So again, it was just, it was pretty hard to believe. I don't know why I was shocked. I did share needles with a lot of people. I have a lot of tattoos all over my body that I got in my house, so who knows where I got it from. The point is that, I was just shocked that I had it for 5 years in recovery and didn't know it. And so I went through treatment. I had a job. I had health insurance. For the first time in my entire life, I had my own health insurance through this job, and so I was able to get treated. And that was in January of this year. So this past year was full of more relapses from my partner. So when you're with somebody for a long time, it's really hard to just say, sayonara, I hope you get better. So I really did feel like I was trying to give opportunity to make, to see if things would change. And they really did not change. And so a month ago, I left him, and that is why I feel like my life is falling apart at the moment, because the person I've been with for 7 years is still using meth for the 40th day in a row. The only reason I know that is because I've had to file a police report, and, it's gotten really ugly, and it's not been a clean break, and you put the dope on top of it, and it becomes a fucking nightmare. And so that is my life today. And luckily, I do know that it won't be that way forever. And whatever pain I may be in right now, the only thing constant is change. And so I know with confidence that things may get worse, but they also might get better. And eventually they will get better. And so I really want to talk about what has kept me sober during the winter of my sobriety, which has been the past 2 years, is my network. And 3 of them are sitting right there. And they're the best fucking people in the world because they come when I call, and they show up no matter what. They show up when I, They helped clean the vomit off the floor when my dad died. And so those are the people that I know that if I'm ever in a spot where I don't have anybody in my corner, they will be in my corner no matter what. And that, to me, is what this program is about the fellowship. And let me just fucking tell you, if I meet somebody on the street and I find out we have something in common, there's no instant bond. There's like, oh, we have that commonality. When I come in these fucking rooms, I know that when I look at you, just your presence in this room, I know that your pain is my pain, and that we share that same pain, and that we share the same life tragedies before recovery and within recovery. And so I do feel safe in these rooms, and I do feel safe with you, if even I don't know you, because you are me, and we are the same people in here. And, you know, today I'm a good mom. I have a little boy who's going to turn 13 next month. Yeah. I don't feel old enough to have a 13-year-old. But I am. I'll be 32 next month. I don't feel that old either. So, you know, he's a pretty common 12-year-old. He talks back and he asks 10,000 questions, and he shows up with a baseball bat when somebody knocks on the front door, because he's the man of the house now. So that, you know, I'm so grateful that he turned out to be a well-balanced child, even though I neglected him for 6 years, the first 6 years that he was alive. He hardly remembers any of it, and I don't know how, but he doesn't. And that is grace. I have been shown grace there. I feel so lucky that I get a second chance to be a good mom and to be present and to fucking spend 3 hours a night doing homework with him. That I'm grateful for, because there's no way I would sit there and do that if I was still using or drinking. He would be on his own, and he would be shit out of luck, because he would only have one parent. If you haven't noticed by now, his other parent is completely out of the picture. He is still using. He's in active addiction. And so that just leaves me. And so I guess I feel like the death of our expectations can be so unbearable, because that's what I feel like I'm going through right now, is the death of an expectation that I had for my life, and only to find out that this is not in alignment with what I want for my life. And that's where this decision has brought me here today. I really know what is in alignment with what I want for my life today. I can stand up here and know exactly what I have in mind. It might not be what happens, but I know when something is God's will now, and what is likely not God's will, and what I need to do for myself and my son. And sometimes, you know, I do hide out. So there are some days that I do not want to show up for life, and all I want to do is hide out and not talk. But I show up anyway. I go to work and I do my fucking job. I come home and I be the best mom that I can be, because that's what we do. We put one foot in front of the other, and we just show up. And so I always feel like with everything that's happened in recovery, in hindsight, I can always see some purpose and higher good or some meaning out of it. With every sequence of events and everything that happens the way that it turns out, there's always a moment when I look back and I'd be like, God, if that hadn't happened, I would have never known this. Or if this hadn't happened this way, I wouldn't have had this opportunity. So if I hadn't have walked in on my dad while he was having a heart attack, I might have been very regretful that he might have died alone. If my partner hadn't relapsed, I might have not found out that I had Hep C for 30 more years. So if I had never become a drug addict, I would have never had these wonderful women in my life. And so there is a higher good in everything, and everything is the way that it's supposed to be in this moment right now, and it will be the same way tomorrow. And I really appreciate you letting me share. Thanks.